I have known Karen Humphrey for a number of years. We were kind of musing about this earlier, maybe 15 years or so. We met down in Kansas. The idea that two people who are from the upper Midwest would need to go to Kansas to meet is a challenge. We were work colleagues in a wonderful town about the size of Osage, Lindsborg, Kansas. Karen worked for the college there, Bethany College, a wonderful Swedish institution. And I was a consultant to the college. I worked through, I guess it was 2 or 3 different college presidents, and one exceptional development professional who turned out to be Karen Humphrey. Karen eventually told me about her Minnesota connections. She had served as a member of the Minnesota Historical Society Board beginning 40 years ago this year. And she's a relatively young person, so you can only imagine their insight into choosing someone of Karen's caliber to join their board. She ultimately became the chair of the board. Of interest to me, of particular interest to me, is the fact that Karen was recently elected or selected as the chair of the Norwegian American Historical Society. So someone who is interested in Norwegian American heritage and knows about Claes Claesen coming down here is a special treat. She's the author of 3 books, including A Family History. Her remarks today are around the lines of old roads and new, sharing our history journey. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce to you my friend, a terrific friend, and our speaker today, Karen Humphrey.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say what an impressive group of people to come to this county historical meeting. Congratulations, and for all of the marvelous work that is going on here to lift up the history of Mitchell County and what has happened in this county throughout its long history. I first knew about Mitchell County I think it was about the 3rd sentence that I ever heard from Kurt Meyer in Lindsborg, Kansas. And so I've known about Mitchell County. I had the good fortune of visiting Kurt and Paula in their home a few times, and so I've been in Mitchell County. And a couple of years ago, my husband and I were at the church at St. Ansgar and had a lovely tour and learned more about Claes Claesen. But I have to say that this year I have had 3 occasions where Mitchell County has entered my life without Kurt and Paula Meyer. The first one was when, Kurt mentioned, I work for the Minnesota Historical Society with individuals and families in philanthropy. And one of our great and wonderful board members lives up at Thief River Falls, Minnesota. And as I was following the edge of glacial Lake Agassiz up to Thief River Falls, and I was staying with Gretchen Beito overnight, she was showing me a memoir that she had put together of her grandfather, who just happened to be J.A. Ernest, who was the pastor at Rock Creek here in Mitchell County. He was here from 1902 to 1920. I said, Mitchell County, I know about this place. Then I happened to be in Florida. I traveled to visit some of our longtime friends of the Minnesota Historical Society who live in Florida, those snowbird types of people. And I was visiting with Alan and Donna Clothier, who live at Estero, Florida. They moved there from Grand Marais. I don't know why anyone would leave Grand Marais for Florida, but they do. They live there year-round. And she was showing me the family history that she had just put together, and she had a great-great-grandfather that was confirmed by Claes Claesen in St. Ansgar, Iowa. And then, not a month ago, I was visiting with Fritjof Lokenskard. The Lokenskard family and the Annigstad family, which is my maiden name, intersect greatly throughout Nicolet County history, and perhaps even in Norway, although I'm not quite sure how that fits together. Somebody else is working on that. But I was mentioning to Fritz Lokenskard that I was coming to Mitchell County, and he said, well, you know, he said, my dad was pastor there, Ole Lokenskard, and my uncle Knut, succeeded him as president of the seminary there. So just in these last few months, I've heard about Mitchell County from other places in my life, and I was glad to imagine it. I'd like to thank you for your interest in local history, for your membership in this County Historical Society, and for our shared interest in local history, in the stories and the people of this place who call Mitchell County home. For those people who were born and nurtured in this place, those who look out over the beautiful farms and farmsteads, over fields and streams and woods that are as picturesque as any Hallmark Thanksgiving card. This, I could easily say, is a Thanksgiving landscape. Like the pilgrims in singing that hymn, We Gather Together, we are gathered here, sort of, at your local county historical society or annual meeting to be thankful for those who cared for and preserved the stories of the people of Mitchell County, stories that give us perspective on the past and courage for the future. So many roads bring us here and bring us home for Thanksgiving. The old roads. In many cases, those roads were laid out by squirrels, who were chased by fox, who were pursued by deer and then by hunters. And the paths were there, so let's build a road here, and let's build communities at those crossroads. Kent Nurburn wrote in his book, A Haunting Reverence, this wonderful line that I love to use. Kent Nurburn writes, I love to walk these ancient pathways. They are the work of generations, the accumulated wisdom working in common purpose. They form the rivulets of our intentions, the capillaries of our dreams. On them we hear the whispers of our past, see the minds and intentions of our ancestors revealed. Old pathways, the capillaries of our dreams. Out in western Minnesota, near the little community of Jeffers, you can walk on the ancient pathways among the outcropping of Sioux quartzite to see pictures carved by people over 5,000 years who came to this spot on the Minnesota prairie on a spiritual journey. Visiting that windswept landscape today, you can sense the whispers of our past. Up on the north coast of the United States, along the shores of Lake Superior, you can follow the canoe paths of such romantic names as Radisson and Grossier and Daniel Grierson, Sieur de Lutte, and walk the trails of the French voyageurs, the Ojibwe, and the gentlemen from England at Grand Portage as they traded pelts and furs and beads and alcohol and tobacco. The furs were sent from the greater Northwest Canada, were sent to London and Paris to be fashioned into hats and magnificent coats, the high fashion of the day. In Concord, Massachusetts, you can walk the trail of Paul Revere and the Revolutionary War soldiers. But I was there one summer to follow the trail, the roads and the paths of Louisa May Alcott, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Nathaniel Hawthorne as they walked the same pathways together discussing ideas and what America was about. Outside of Dodge City, Kansas, you can stand in the ruts of the old Santa Fe Trail. You can stand in those wagon wheel ruts as people pushed on a journey westward, farther west than Iowa or Minnesota. They were leaving behind what had been, pushing toward what had become. Excuse me. And here in Mitchell County, you have ancient paths, roads walked by people like Hamlin Garland, who reported real life on the frontier, Pastor Klaus Clausen, the leader in Norwegian Lutheran education, excuse me, Atlanta Sampson, who gave her all to her life's dream, and Weston Noble, who nurtured such exquisite choral music that church choirs and college choirs throughout the country embrace his sound. And you have the pathway, thank you, of Jane Elliott, who bravely set down a new path so that children and their parents could experience discrimination firsthand. All through our country, all through these places, the work of generations, the accumulated wisdom, the rivulets of our intentions, the capillaries of our dreams. Like you, I think of all those who pushed forward to new places, and I wonder what they carried from home on their journey. What kind of markers they left behind? What did they carry with them to create home where they were going? The very sense of home runs so deep within us, into our hands, our hearts, our souls. And even though we've lived in a place all of our lives, there is still something about finding home that drives us. The search for home often begins with something deep in our conscience that we can't quite explain. Yet we try to figure it out. We found something, hold something in our hands, a sepia photo, a psalm book, or a Bible, often written in a language someone else could understand. A tool for stirring, a bowl for mixing, a cup for drinking, hand-stitched linens, an axe, a sigh, a plow, a lathe, a yoke, implements for establishing home, and a farm. These things give us a tangible connection to our home and with people from our past. This often gives us strength for the future. And you know what we do with those items? We build a museum. Some of us take the work of our ancestors to feel a certain closeness to them. If you've ever done this, and I think many of you have, you'll know it stirs quite a certain closeness. Creating quilts, knitting, crocheting, rose mauling, tatting, weaving, wood carving, folk dancing, and of course baking certain items. Those soul foods, especially at this time of the year. For me, that would be krumkaka, lefse, fruit soup, fatiman, and yes, lutefisk, that piece of cod that passes all understanding. And it's sometimes, at this time of the year more so than any other, when families gather, that children are listening, and we hope they listen carefully to the stories that are told. Some of us even write family histories, recording the births, marriages, baptisms, and the passings in our families, ready for when our children are really interested. Some of us follow the search through ancient cathedral libraries of Europe, humble crofters' cottages. And isn't it interesting how the new roads of our lives take us farther from home faster? The superhighways to the airport allow us to be in Osage for breakfast. And then the superhighways get us to Reykjavik by air for a coffee, and to Oslo for supper. And the next day, and the very next day, you can be driving on an ancient road along a fjord, wind your way up to a high pasture, follow a simple pilgrim's path to a country church, and stand at the baptismal font of your great-great-grandmother whom you never knew, but whose name you carry, and whose blood courses through your veins. So sometimes these roads, these new roads of today, help us find home and bring us closer to old homes. All human beings, you know, are practicing historians. As we go through life, we present ourselves through our stories. And if you haven't written your family's story, go home and do it this afternoon. Garrison Keillor has said, "Nothing we do for children is ever wasted," and those family stories are precious. One of the greatest historians of our region, indeed of the 20th century, was Theodore Blagan, the eminent scholar of the Norwegian immigration, the founding father of the Midwest historians, secretary and editor of the Norwegian American Historical Association, superintendent of the Minnesota Historical Society, dean of the University of Minnesota Graduate School. He wrote that history, like charity, begins at home. The world we first know is the home and the neighborhood. It is there we first explore history. Who is known in early years? The local story of the haunted house, the tale of the cellar hole in the abandoned field, or the nearby creek and how it was named, or what happened and how did people survive that last great blizzard, or the one before that, or the one before that, or the one before that. It is from community memory that we first look out upon life and the world. Then we learn the story of the land in which we live and of countries and nations and peoples outside, and we begin to realize the broader history. More than 80 years ago, Blagan encouraged historians to gather up the diaries and other records that tell the way of life of the farmer, and one day the historians may surprise us by writing the story of the farm and its people, not less fascinating and more significant to the people of today than the story of the medieval manor. It will be a story of development, Blagan wrote, from the day of small things, a story of the folk who in their toil and integrity create the great things that historians and poets and novelists search for in the human saga. I'd like to invite your consideration that the Midwest, Mitchell County and Nicollet County, for examples, where I grew up, are the great wellspring of the American history itself. As we knit together stories of scattered communities and families, the unpacking of immigrant trunks, the building of humble homes, the democratic process is more comfortable in our egalitarian Midwest with the heritage of knowing our neighbors, the homely tasks of living and living better, the occasions of common life that we share, provide roots and a global perspective on history. To tell the story of America, one must read the stories of Mitchell County and of Nicollet County and the great Midwest, the human saga that we are all so much a part of. John Locke, in a new book called The Lost Region Toward a Revival of Midwestern History, quotes one Professor George Moss, a wildly popular professor of history at Iowa, the University of Iowa, who was a refugee from Hitler's Germany. And he said, "Any historian who has not passed through Iowa is not worthy of his salt." Stories of Iowa, stories of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and all of the places that we are part of. Gerda Lerner, in her essay, The Necessity of History, writes that history functions to satisfy a variety of human needs. History as a memory and as a source of personal identity. History as collective immortality. History as cultural tradition. And history as explanation. Now, remembering that every morning is a new day for history, the time to begin stories for tomorrow is today. What efforts can we make to collect items and stories from the present? What roads are we putting down for the new generation ahead? What are we collecting, preserving? What stories are we capturing for the future? Oral histories? Photographic essays? I understand, and I've seen the one of Hamlin Garland that Kurt Meyer and John Morris put together. The barns, the churches, the schools of today, identified please. The stories of Vietnam veterans of Mitchell County. The stories of Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan soldiers and their families. Stories of the newest immigrants to Mitchell County and their artifacts. What did they bring with them in their immigrant trunks to remind them of home? And the art that is part of their creation. One of the greatest things a museum can do for others is to help others see their own story as part of the community. This makes everyone a better citizen of our community and a better citizen of our country. Elaine Human-Gurian suggests that museums, institutions of memory, are important to our collective well-being. Without institutions of memory, a community can fall apart. She further suggests that museums are the savings banks for our souls. Let me repeat that. Museums are the savings banks for our souls. Now, on our newest road, the internet and the interconnectedness it provides, we can see in real time history as it happens on continents, nations, countries, and tribes around the globe. As we bump into each other constantly without the cushion of space and time, as the reactions come faster and faster, also grows the potential for misunderstanding and conflict. It becomes important that with every day, we improve our capacity to get along, and that starts with a willingness to understand who, individually and collectively, we are, and why we are like we are, which in turn can help us to respect our differences rather than have our differences propel us to hostility. To appreciate who others are and where they're coming from, it's important to listen to each other's stories, the stories of those who came before us, those who have come to us, are like technologies, can bring us closer together. Local historical organizations play such an important role in this small and ever-shrinking world, helping our fellow Earth travelers to understand each other. We live our lives. We tell our stories. Our ancestors continue to live by way of our telling their stories. The past becomes part of the present and thereby becomes part of the future. More than anything else, history is about the future. History is the starting point. Being human means thinking and feeling. It means reflecting on the past and visioning into the future. We experience, we give voice to that experience, others reflect on it and give it new form. That new form in turn influences and shapes the way next generations experience their lives, creating stronger communities. That, my friends, is why history matters. Thank you for your journey with all those who love and revere local history as we lay down new roads for the next generations for the future. Thank you.